Not many people know this about me, but I come from the software IT world, and there's a maxim that says, with power comes complexity. In other words, if you want a powerful tool, there just has to be some complexity to it. There's no way around that. And Scrivener is a really powerful tool. That's not to say that Scrivener is overly complex. The developers have done a good job of making the power available to writers as simple and as streamlined as possible. But even so, there's a lot to the tool. And I've seen a lot of writers get turned off by it. And that's too bad, because I think Scrivener is a great tool for writers, which is why I'm dedicating this video to showing you how to get started in Scrivener and use it like a pro. My name is Beaulieu, and I'm a full-time fantasy and science fiction author. I've published a dozen novels, more than 20 short stories, and I really enjoy talking about the craft of writing, which is why I started this channel, A Novel Approach. A Novel Approach is dedicated to helping you reach your writing goals by sharing inspiration, technique, and my 20+ years of experience in writing and publishing. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create your first project, how to use Scrivener effectively on a day-to-day basis, and how to build not just your manuscript, but other crucial material that feeds your story, like your world, your characters, and your plot. We're going to jump into the main content in just one second, but before we do, I wanted to let you know that this video doesn't have a sponsor, but it is supported by those of you who get value out of these instructional videos and share, leave donations here on YouTube, or purchase writing classes or sign books from my online store, quillings.com. So thanks so much for all of the continued support. I really appreciate it, and it's because of you that I can continue to make free videos just like this one. And for those of you who are new, please consider subscribing so you can keep up on all the latest tips, tricks, and deep dive techniques I'm adding on writing. Okay, so let's get started. So what you're seeing here is Scrivener. This is a project that I've been working on for a few months, but I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to go to File, New Project, and it will come up with this project templates. And you can scroll through these and look at them a bit. There's some fiction, nonfiction, script writing. I'll stay in the fiction, and I will choose novel. I'll just say create. We'll call this new book. And it will create a new project with Scrivener's stock information. In other words, it's not completely empty. It does have some basic stuff here so you can kind of get started on your project. And the first document on the left-hand view, the binder, is this novel format document. I'm not going to go over this in detail. It's pretty long, but you can read over it and get some sense of what this document is for. This is describing the novel format versus, say, the short story format. But let me go over here to this left-hand side. So this is the binder. We can hide this binder, we can show, but generally speaking, you'll have that open so you can navigate. And this is where everything is driven from in Scrivener. So you'll select something on the left-hand side that will show up in the center view, and whatever you have selected in the center view will get reflected in the inspector over on the right-hand side. So let me just cover quickly the three main views that you would have in the center here. The first one in this selection group here is an editor view. And so this is kind of what we normally think of when we're thinking of creating new manuscripts, writing stories, some kind of word processor, and that's more or less what this is. The second one is a corkboard, and that allows us to organize and fill in information from a higher level. So we can see the title of different chapters, and we can click in here and add synopses. We can add some detailed information about the scenes. And the last one is the outline view. And so this will show different folders and things within those folders, the scenes, and other metadata like the label. There are different labels. These are stock labels. We're going to change these later on. The status, you can have things like to do, you're planning on writing it, you're in progress, you've completed the first draft, so on and so forth. The type, the target, and how close you are to finishing that target, that sort of thing. So it's a different way of organizing your writing, your chapters, and your scenes. For this particular video, I'm going to stay in the editor pane. These other two are complex enough that I'm going to dedicate one more video to those, the corkboard and the outline view. So let me go back to the editor. And I'm going to quickly note that we can have dual or single pane editing. And we do that with that icon in the upper right here. For the time being, I'm just going to stay in the single editor view. And so let me just touch on a couple of things on the binder. So everything within the binder is a scrivening. A scrivening can be thought of as a text document, but it's more than that. It can be a folder, and in fact, any scrivening can be a folder. So if I added something to the scene here, for example, If I add a new text, and I'm just going to put it inside of that scene. That scene is now a folder. I'm not going to keep it that way. I'm going to get rid of this right now. So if you want, you can delete things, move them to trash. But just understand that these are kind of generic objects. We have folders, and that's how we should look at them. So in the binder, we have these different scrivenings. We're going to treat the chapters as folders and the scenes below them as text documents that get added to them. So let's add a new chapter. There's a few ways you can do it. Down at the bottom, you can select this new text, new folder. You can also select the manuscript and say add new folder, for example. And that'll put it at the bottom. And so I can add another chapter here. And then a shortcut for adding a new text document is just to hit enter when you're in any specific folder. So I hit enter, it creates this blank document, and I'm going to just call this scene 1. And just so that you can see that we can add more than one scene, I'm going to go back to the chapter and hit enter again, and it creates a second scene. So scene 1 and scene 2. So just with that little bit, we have enough to create an entire book. We know how to create chapters, create a folder under the manuscript, and we know how to create scenes. We create new text documents under the folders that we created. That's it. That's the entire structure for a novel. And if I flip back to, for example, this other one, you can see that that's all I have in the binder for the manuscript. So theoretically, I can stop the video here, right? I don't have to do anything else. But of course, we want more. There's tons of stuff in the rest of the binder, and that's what we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of the video. And I'm going to cover 10 basic parts, and the one that I just covered was the first one. That is how to create a new project, what the project looks like, and how to create those new chapters and scenes. The second step in using Scrivener like a pro is to get to know the binder. So we see that there are characters. So this, again, is just a folder, and it has a special icon. I can change this icon, in fact, and I do on different things. So just to make it more, I don't know, pleasing to you or more organized, more intuitive, you can change them. So I could change this to look like some kind of notes, a green notepad, for example, and then I could change it back. So let's go back to characters. There's a few different types here. I'm just going to keep that photo that we had earlier. And you can do that with any scrivening. There's also places. I tend to rename this world or maybe setting. That's just, again, more intuitive to me because I'm writing secondary worlds, typically fantasy and science fiction. And for these two in particular, there are some built-in features that you should know about. If we go down here, we can see that there are template sheets, and there's a character sketch and a setting sketch. We can create new characters by going to add. Now, we could add a text document and fill something out for ourselves, or we can do a new from template. So I'll do new from character sketch, and that is an exact echo. It's really just copying from this character sketch document and giving you a new version of it. And so I might call this Tom. Now remember earlier when we hit enter in the manuscript, it created a blank text document. When you're in characters and you hit enter, it will create a blank character sketch. So it's another way of creating them. So maybe here we have Mary and then Sally. So you can very quickly create these. You can also change the base character sketch to be what you want before you add them. World is very similar. So if I go here, world, add, new from template, there's the setting sketch. So maybe we have new Wisconsin. And similarly, if we just hit enter, it creates a new setting sketch. So we can have new California, what have you. And then you can change whatever you want in that setting sketch. Moving down, there is front matter as well. This particular subfolder is meant for compile, and specifically what it's trying to do is to have things ready and available if you're generating via that compile feature a manuscript or a paperback, in which case you might have the title page, the copyright, the dedication, that sort of thing, or an ebook, and you'll have the cover and dedication. It's more streamlined with an ebook, right? And so this allows you to have some fluidity, different functionality based on what you're actually trying to compile, so that you don't have to put that into the manuscript itself. It just pulls from this front matter when you need it. You can also have back matter. Again, this is part of compile, and so I'm not going to touch on that now, but just understand that it's there and that's what it's for. You don't really have to touch it until you're ready to compile. Now, there are, in the stock Scrivener project, notes and research. I personally just use research. Certainly there could be a reason for notes. And in fact, you can add tons of other new folders. Let me just add a new folder. And keep in mind that this binder is like a folder structure, and so you're placing these things at different levels. And so right now it's inside of research, but if I go down between these two objects and go to the left, you can see that that little dot right here shifts over. So here it goes to the right, there it goes over. So it's going to be putting it at the same level as notes, research, that sort of thing. And again, if I right click on that object, I can go down to change icon and change it to anything I want. And so this is really freeform in the binder in terms of what you want to organize and how you organize it. You can customize it to what works best for you. And also keep in mind, again, you can move all of this stuff around. So in the beginning, I might be working on the world, and so maybe I'll just move this up initially and have that first at the top of the binder. And later, as I get more deep into things, I tend to put all of my plotting stuff into research. I put different notes about the magic system or specific histories in the world in this as well, but I also keep the plots. And so I might then later move this to the top instead. So just super configurable. You can move stuff around. The binder is just a very nice way of keeping all that stuff organized. And then lastly, there are the template sheets here. So we have our character sketch, setting sketch. You can change those as needed. Okay, the third step in using Scrivener like a pro is just getting to know the interface. And so we've talked about the binder a bit. I do want to talk now about the different editor panes. And so I mentioned the 3 different types that we can have, but let's just focus again on the main editor style interface. So I'm going to go and select a chapter over here. Again, whatever you select in the left-hand side in the binder will show up here, and you can have multiple scrivenings, so I can select all of these on the left-hand side. I could select just a few of them, one, and then I'm command clicking. This might, on the PC, it might be like command or opt click. I'm not totally sure. But you can select a range or specific scrivenings, and they will show up on the editor pane here. Again, you can always look in this list view here to see what you have selected. But this can be a little bit confusing, so I want to clarify this. If I click on this chapter, I can see that I have the chapter selected here. Again, up at the top, this is actually the folder, and this divider here is a divider between scrivenings. And again, they're all scrivenings. So the top is the chapter, down here is the scene itself, the text. So when you go to edit, if you have selected the chapter, you're going to want to make sure you're down here, because the chapter can have text. You want to avoid it, but it can have text. And I'm not saying there's never a reason to use text in a folder. It's just I don't use that. And so I'm going to try to stay tight to that methodology. And so if I type over here, notice right here, this folder icon. If I come over here and I just type something, now we can see that that scrivening has like a little page with writing on it. And that means that there's something in that folder. In other words, there's text in that folder. And that's an indicator to me that I want to get rid of it. I've put something in the wrong place. In the beginning, I just typed stuff there, not knowing what was what. Sometimes I accidentally paste things into the wrong spot. And then it gets even more confusing the more things that you select. So if I select 5 scrivenings, 2 chapters and 3 scenes, they're all showing up top to bottom here. So the top one is the chapter, the scene, the next chapter, the first scene in that chapter, and then the second scene in that chapter. So just be aware, and this will start to get less confusing, A, as you use it, and B, as you start adding things to it. It's a little confusing in the beginning because everything's just blank, right? But that will start to get cleared up. But just start to get used to that. Be aware of where you are, not just in the binder, but in your editor pane too. And then, as I mentioned, you can have 2 editors, and they both have their own context. So if I go to the left-hand side, when I select the binder, anything in the binder, it's going to reflect that selection in whichever one is currently active. So you see how this is kind of yellow, it's highlighted in essence. And if I go click over here, now this one is. So that's where it will be reflected. So if I click the chapter here, it shows that chapter and the 2 scenes. If I go over to this side and just select that first chapter, now it's just that first chapter and the first scene. So Just be aware of that as well, because that can start to get confusing too. You might select something over in the binder and just think it's supposed to be in one window and it's not showing up. Just be aware it's context sensitive in terms of which editor is currently selected. And so, like, the most common way that I edit is with a single pane. At least that's when I'm most deep into my writing. I use a single pane, and I'm going to show you composition mode in just 1 second. But I will very often use dual panes if, for example, I'm starting a new chapter. I want to remind myself of what the old one looks like. So let me quickly and magically add some stuff to these 2 different chapters here. Okay, so I have copied from my current working project, the book I'm working on, 3 different scenes in a couple different chapters. And so this new chapter has a couple thousand words. This is the first cue I want you to get used to, is looking at the word count at the bottom. We can see that it has a couple thousand words here. This scene 1 in the second chapter has 2,500 words. And then the second scene in that chapter has some 1,500 words. And so altogether, if I click on the manuscript, it will just put all of that in line, all the chapters, all the scenes. And now we can see I have 6,000 words total. So again, we can have, maybe I'm working on a new chapter, and so I focus on the left on the old chapter, on the right I look at the new chapter. So one of the things that I tend to do, these chapters are arbitrary. They're not going to be used when you compile. So you do not want to put chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, that sort of thing. Because in compile, that's going to be done for you. It will make the chapter 1, chapter 2 for you if you do it properly. And I'll talk about that in that video when we get to it. Instead, what I want this to be is informational for me about what that chapter is. Now, you can put that stuff in, like the synopsis, for example. Let me click on the chapter here. We can see that it's selected here. And I'm just going to make this a single pane editor for now. And on the right-hand side, you can see things like synopsis. So this is the inspector. The inspector is the third main thing. There's the binder, the center editor view, which has 3 different options, and then the inspector. You may use the synopsis, this first metadata tab here, fairly regularly. It has the title, synopsis, and some notes. I personally don't, nor do I use the bookmarks very much. And there's metadata that has some stock metadata. You can add to this as well. I don't use that either, but I do use the snapshots and the comments heavily. And so I'll go over that a bit more at the end of this video. But again, just be aware that when you select something in the central editing view, the inspector is going to show whatever scene, whatever scrivening you're currently in. So again, very context sensitive, Scrivener. Okay, let me touch on a couple of other pieces of the editor here. You see these format and this typical formatting for a document. One of the things that you'll want to do early on is to change these defaults to be what you like. I happen to like Palatino 12 in particular. If you go to Scrivener and then Settings, and you go to Editing, this Formatting sub-tab here shows the basic format that all scrivenings will have by default. And so if I click down here and then select this text window, it'll come up with the fonts. I happen to have, this is on the Mac again, I have recently used, on the PC it may come up with all fonts, I'm not sure what it's going to show there. But you can essentially select whatever font, whatever size that you want, and when you do, it will change this view. So just for example, if I pick Trajan here, it'll show Trajan in all caps, and I could change the size, and then that will change the new scenes and any scrivenings that are using this default view. So do that up front before you really start digging in, because you don't want to go and change that stuff later. So I'll go back to Palatino 12 here, and then once that's set, any new document will have those fonts in there. Because of that, because I set this up front, I don't often use a lot of this style. I'll use italics in my writing. I'll use bullets in brainstorming. In the research sub-tab, again, I put a lot of notes and references for myself, for the world that I've built, and so I'll use that a lot in that area. But that's just about all I use of this. And so you may want to get rid of those. So under the binder here, again, we can hide the binder, but there's a couple of other selections. We can hide that format bar, so that'll get rid of that. We can also show it from here. And then there's also a ruler that you can optionally have. I don't use that because I just need to know initially up front that everything is set up in terms of having a indented first line. And beyond that, I don't need it. I'm not using this for my layout for like a print format or anything, so that's not useful to me. So I get rid of it. And then one more feature that's very useful and very powerful is the project search. Any given scrivening, you can do find, Control F or Command F on the PC, and I might look for translucent. And it will just search through the document that you have currently selected. This project search is a search for all of the scrivenings in the binder. So it's not just your manuscript, it also searches your research, your world, your characters, and everything in there. It is optional which things you search for and how you search. There's a bunch of options for this. It's so powerful. This is going to be yet another video. So again, subscribe if you're interested in learning more about how to get some of the power features out of the Scrivener search. But just keep in mind, it's going to look for any scrivenings that have the text that you type. So if I look for Shiv, my main character, I see that she shows up in scene 1, the first scene in the first chapter, and then scene 1 and scene 2. So going back to the titles for these, so I do like making these specific titles. So let me just show you on that project that I'm working on. Again, I'm not naming them chapter 1 and chapter 2. I'm going to name them the purpose of that chapter. So Shiv is a sculptor and she breaks this hummingbird that she's working on. And if there's only a single scene, I just use the same one. And the reason I do that is because if I'm looking for things, sometimes the folder doesn't show up in the search. So again, if I look for just Shiv, well, now it has it in that folder, but there might be something inside of this document and the folder won't actually show up, but the scene will. And so I want to know what that scene is about just from that title. I'll change these other two as well. So now you can see that we have Shiv breaks the hummingbird in the first chapter and scene. And then the Utama, who's like an emperor, comes to visit their family. And then I'll use that for the first scene or whichever scene it most applies to. And other ones, again, I'll just make descriptive. So again, don't use like chapter 1, chapter 2, make them descriptive. And when you export this, you'll get your chapter 1, chapter 2. And in the meantime, this just helps you stay organized, keep the story in your head, keep everything straight, that sort of thing. Let me come back to the editor view here. We can change the zoom level of this so it's something more pleasing to the eye. So I tend to do that. And each editor can have its own. So I'll go over here and change that to the same thing. Now notice that the text gets really squished when that happens. I have a large monitor in my office. I have a very wide screen, and so this presents no problem. But when I'm out and about, like at a coffee shop, I will want to hide the binder, and then I'll hide the inspector. And so now you can see we gain a lot of real estate, and I can just work on the couple things I'm working on and stay focused. And so this touches on the fourth step of using Scrivener like a pro, and that's adjusting things however you want. So again, we can hide and show the binder, we can hide and show the inspector, you can change the sizes of these editor panes, you can change whether or not you actually want two editor panes or one. And again, the sizes of the inspector and binder can also change. There are times when I have a lot of description, like I mentioned in these chapters and scenes. They can get a little bit long sometimes, and sometimes I want real estate, and so they're squished. Other times I'm working with them a lot, and so I just want to see them a bit more. So you can alter that to suit your needs. You can show or hide these folders and format bars. You can adjust the zoom. You can show or hide this project search here as well, just with that little magnifying glass icon. And lastly, let me show you the composition mode. If we go under View, enter Composition Mode, it will show you a different sort of view. It's hiding everything in the background. We can see that if we go down to the bottom here and move this slider so we can see some of it. I played with that a little bit here and there, but I really just like having it totally walled off, basically. You can change the color, you can get out of composition mode here, or you can hit Escape. You can also hit keyboard shortcuts for everything, Command Option F, and go into this full screen mode. Note that I changed the zoom of those other editors to be 175, but in here, the zoom is different, it's 125. So the composition mode, keep in mind, has its own zoom setting. So I'll change that. And again, you can just change this until you find what's most pleasing to your eye. Similar with the paper width. So once you change the zoom, you can just see how wide that you like your screen. And then you might also move it to the left or to the right. There are some other options that you can go through. I'm not going to go through those right now, but dig into that a little bit, and do keep in mind as well, I'm just going to hit Escape. If you go under Help, there is a Scrivener manual here, like any app. It is good. They're good about detailing all of these various options very well and in an understandable manner. So now that we know a little bit about the interface, the binder, the editor, the inspector, composition mode, it's time to start adding to your story. And by that, I mean adding specific details about the world, the setting, the plot. We've talked about adding different folders. And keep in mind, you can also add folders to things like the world. Maybe you have different regions in here. And so you might want to have a new folder and break things down that way. So I can put the folder in the right place. I could add this, and maybe I make this Midwest. And then I could have another folder, the West, add California there. And we start adding more structure to it. It's not necessary, but it's there and waiting for you. You may also want to have different types of templates. So we have the character and the setting templates. Maybe you want your own. Maybe you want both a region and a city. So if I come here and I have the setting sketch, maybe I'll rename this to region. And I'm in this template sheets, and I'm going to stay there just for this part, and then I'm going to create some of these. So if I do a right click and duplicate this, it'll create an exact copy, and maybe I'll change this to city. And so now if I come to my setting, if I go to the world here, Midwest, and maybe I'll add new from template, and we can see we have the region and the city that we just created, one modified, one created. So I'll add the city here, and maybe I want to have Milwaukee. So very configurable. Start filling out your world, start filling out the setting. In the same way, you can have additional character sketches. So maybe you have different types of characters, maybe you're adding different magic systems and you want to notate some of that, or add different skill sets that people might have archetypes in the character sketches. And so you can notate those as well. Very, very configurable. Start filling that out and using the power that's available to you in Scrivener. The sixth step in using Scrivener like a pro is adding different labels to help you with your organization in the manuscript. Now, this is more applicable to those who use multi-POV stories like I do, but I will give you a couple of other ideas for how you might use this. Let me just show you one example. So this is a book that I've already written. You can see that I have a prologue here that's not tied to any specific character, but I have POV characters like Rylan, who's in this gigantic forest. I have Rhiannon, who's in the forest as well, but she's a magic user. She's a druid type character. Lorelei is a Sherlock Holmes type of character who lives in the mountains. And so point here is that you can see there's different colors associated with each of these. And so let's go over how to do that. So I'm going to flip back to my project over here. You can see that I changed my characters to Shiv, Nira, and Jasper. These are characters in my current project I'm working on. And we're going to change these to reflect that. So I want 3. So I'm going to add just one more folder here. So I will add a new folder, and I'll say Jasper appears. Okay. So I have Shiv. I'm going to say this one is for Nira, and this one is for Jasper. And so in order to do that, we're going to use labels. So if I right click on any of these, you can see label, and it has these stock labels, and we can edit these. So I'm going to go into edit, and I'm going to change the top 3 to Shiv, Nira, and Jasper. And then I'll just get rid of these other ones. I don't need those right now. And so I'll say OK. And then when I go to right click and I say label, I can see my 3 selections, Shiv, Nira, and Jasper. So I've selected Shiv, but nothing actually happened over here yet. And so to change that, we go to View, use Label Color in. We can see the binder, but I prefer doing it just to the icons. If we choose the binder, let's show you this. It puts in a little circle of that color. I happen to prefer it on the folders themselves, but you can change it to whatever you want, of course. So I'll do use label in icons instead. And so these have now changed. And so let me go back here. I'm just going to get rid of the binder one. And let me change this one to Nira. And then finally, Jasper. Now, these are pretty similar in color, and that's a problem. I really want to use those so I can see them at a glance, who they're tied to. So if I go back to the labels and edit these one more time, if I double click on the little color dot here, I could make this blue. I could make Nira green and Jasper red, let's say. I'll say okay, get rid of the color selector. And so now we can see blue, green, and red for Shiv, Nira, and Jasper. So it's just a very nice and easy way to use those labels for a different purpose, for a very quick understanding of what that's about. Now, you may want to do that for POV like I have if you have multi-POVs, but there are other possibilities. Let's say you're writing a time travel story and you have like 3 or 4 different timelines that you're working with, something in 1800s, 1900s, something far future. You could assign labels to those time frames. And so you can get a quick understanding of which time frames, which time periods are in which chapters. Another reason you might want to use this is for settings. Let's say you have a story that's set in Paris, New York, and Tokyo. And so you create labels for each of those settings. And again, just a quick way to understand what's there. You might do it for different parts of your story in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, just so you can kind of see visually how it's breaking down. There's lots of different reasons you might want to use that type of functionality, but now you know, and it's available to you. So use that to your benefit. The 7th step in using Scrivener like a pro is setting targets for your word counts and using them to help you. We can see down below in any of the editors and composition mode, the words for a given scene. And it's actually the current selection. Again, this is context sensitive. If I select everything, it will show all of that. So just keep that in mind. But what the targets allow you to do is to set goals for the manuscript as a whole and for sessions. For me, that's daily, and that's, I think, the most common. So if I go into Project, Show Project Targets, you can do Shift-Command-T as well on the Mac, we'll see this sub-window comes up. So we see the manuscript target here. Now note that this area right here is clickable. So if I click here, this is going to be a relatively short novel. So I might say 90,000 words. Now note that this was empty just a second ago. And when I filled out the target, it now knows I have a target and it calculates based on however many words are in the manuscript. So any word qualifies under here. And you'll see that. And you can configure this as well to be characters. In Europe, especially, I think characters is more common than words. So you can use that as well. I happen to use words. Same deal down here for the session target. Back in the day, before I was full-time writing, I would try to get 1,000 words per day. That was my goal. Now that I'm full-time, I try to do 1,000 words in the morning for a couple of hours, and I try to do that again in the afternoon. So I shoot for 2,000. This is meant to be something that helps you, not hurts you. And so I'm a big proponent of not pushing yourself to the edge every single day. You want to create targets for yourself, not just in writing, but in life. You want to create goals that are achievable, but that push you a little bit, but leave room for life to happen, because life is going to happen, right? And so 2,000 is relatively doable for me on most days. But what I do in addition to this is I set weekly and monthly goals as well. So I'm looking for around 20,000 words per month-ish, something like that. And that is certainly less than 2,000 words per day, right? If I did that every day in a month, I'd have 60,000 words. But I know I'm not going to get there. And so I'm looking for, let's say 20 to 30,000. It kind of depends on where I am in the book and how quickly it's moving. But that gives me leeway to take a weekend off, to spend time with my family, to go take a trip somewhere or what have you. Just get away from writing and experience life a little bit. You should do that too. Don't make these so draconian that it puts you off and this becomes a burden. You want writing to be fun and you want to feel rewarded when you hit these things. So make them achievable. And if you go beyond them, awesome. And if you find that you're consistently hitting them, well, then maybe raise them. I'll show you this options as well. So you can change some options on the draft itself. Probably the one people will change most often is this reset session count. So I use at a set time each day. I just do it at 1 a.m. I write during the day, but you might write at different times. And so every day that session target of 2,000 words is reset. You can, by the way, I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but you can go into the writing history and see what you've written per day. So it keeps track, not just on a daily basis, but over time. So you can see how you've progressed over the weeks and months that you were writing the story in this history. The 8th step in using Scrivener like a pro is to actually use it. I think you have enough tools at this point to get in and start working on your manuscript. You can develop the story, develop your world, develop your characters, start your writing, add to your chapters and scenes as you go along. We know enough now about the different editors so that you can decide whether or not you want to be in single pane mode. That's more focused in my mind. Composition mode, that's very focused. When I know exactly what I want to write, that's the mode I go into because it allows me to keep the most out of my mind and allow me to stay in the story for as long and as effectively as possible. And so I do. But then there are times when you just want to go to dual pane editing because you're referencing something in another area of the story and using that to remind yourself of what you're writing or perhaps where you're going. Maybe you're looking at the plot and you're trying to write towards something. Lots and lots of reasons to go into that mode. And so your story will start to develop. You'll add more and more. You'll probably go back tons of times and add characters or notes to them, change your plot as you go, and that's totally fine. That's what Scrivener is super good at, is keeping all of this stuff ready and available for you and allow you to change it midstream, which happens all the time. Even if you plan a ton of things up front and you're a heavy outliner, you are definitely going back and changing some stuff along the way. Nobody is writing from beginning to end and not changing some of the characters, some of the details, some of the plot, even if they had a 100-page outline before they started. That's what Scrivener is really good at, just allowing you to plan as much as you want up front, help you along the way, keep you on track, and then help you get to the end, help you to write that last scene, that last chapter. The 9th step in using Scrivener like a pro is to take advantage of the comments. So let me go to single pane editing here. These comments came over from the stuff that I copied, but you can, of course, add more. When you're in the inspector, we have the 2 most used panes for me are the snapshots, which I will cover next, and then the comments and footnotes. And so to add a new one, you can just select the text that you want to notate, and then you can do insert comment. And so it will highlight that almost as like a hyperlink in the text itself. And then it will add a comment with the person who added it and a date. I used to keep this. I don't so much anymore. I thought it might be useful to know when I wrote things, but I don't really care much anymore. So I'll just delete that and put something like add more about the hummingbird. So these might be things that come up while I'm writing. I might think of something at night and then take a note for myself to add it later, and then I'll add a comment. Maybe I have a better idea for a bit of magic, how it should work. Maybe I have a better idea of how to tease a big reveal that's coming up. There are a million reasons to use comments, but you should use them to help you. And one of the big things I use them for is to stay on track. I used to, back in the early days when I was a baby writer, I would stop what I was doing sometimes and go back and change something because I thought of some new idea or a different plot point or whatever. And I would go back and change it. And it was this constant rewriting process. And it just slowed my progress down a ton. And so now I try to stolidly march forward, keep going on that book, unless it's something that really affects a lot and I have to go back and change it. If it's not that, I will just take a note, put a comment somewhere so that when I go through that manuscript the next time, I will see it and make the change so it's not lost. The idea is not lost. And then I'll just keep writing. I try to get through to the end and then go back and work on all that stuff. And because I do that, when I get through the entire manuscript, I call that the 0th draft. I finished that. And I call it the 0th draft because no one is going to read that. I cannot give that to people. It makes no sense. It needs too much work. It would be confusing. And so I'll finish it, I'll go back, rewrite it with all the comments that I put in, all the ideas that I've had that I've jotted down maybe in a research document in the plot, and then I'll incorporate all the stuff for my first draft, and then that's ready to go out to maybe beta readers, possibly an editor. You can also, by the way, use this for if you're working with someone collaboratively, which you can do in Scrivener, and I've done that with Scrivener as well. I've written stories with other authors. And so that's possible. And you can both add notes. So that's why it adds the author to it, who wrote the comment. And that's super useful for keeping track of who wrote what along the way. I'm going to create a separate video for that. And then also one more, if you have an editor, your editor could go in with Scrivener, assuming they have the application, and make comments and changes and give it back to you. And so they might put comments in as well. So it's not always just you adding comments. It could be other people that are working on your stuff with you in some capacity. And then one last thing I'll mention about comments is, as I'm going through things like structural edits or copy edits that I've received, even if they haven't worked on it in Scrivener with me, I'll get a document back, maybe a marked up Word document. I'll go through and try to incorporate everything I can on a first pass basis, meaning anything I can change quickly, I do. And then anything that takes more effort on my part, that takes more thinking, I will use comments to just say something like, think about the approach to Shiv in this scene here. I'll summarize the comments from the editor, put it in a comment in my Scrivener project, and then when I get back to it on the next fuller pass, then it's there and waiting for me. And lastly, the 10th step to using Scrivener like a pro is to take snapshots. Now, I mentioned that on the inspector pane, there's this snapshot pane here as well. And so that shows what snapshots you have. And just like everything else, this is context sensitive, so keep that in mind. If you are looking at the first chapter, it's only going to show that chapter. So let me take a couple snapshots. I'm going to show you something here. And so what I typically do is select the first scene and then all the way to the last scene. Don't select the manuscript. It has to know which scrivenings in particular that you're going to take snapshots of. If you just did the manuscript, it would only take that one. And so I'll go under Documents, Snapshots, and you can either take unnamed snapshots, but I prefer the second one, Titled Snapshots. So untitled or titled. So I'll select that. And what I'll do here is take the year, September in my case, and I'll give it sort of a purpose. So when would you want to do this? I take it at major milestones. So when I get to that 0th draft that I mentioned, where it's written, but it's raw, I'll take a snapshot of everything. I'll hit enter, it'll take those snapshots. I'll do it again when I reach the true first draft. I'll do it again after I incorporate comments from my editor on a structural basis. Again, when I do it for the copy edits, so on and so forth. And it's not just those major milestones. You can take it anytime. If you're about to give it to beta readers, you're going to want to take a snapshot just so you can see what you have. Now, again, I mentioned the context sensitive thing. So if I go to this folder here, we can see that there's no snapshot. And that's because the folder, as we mentioned, has no text in it. And so it doesn't bother taking snapshots of empty documents. When I click on this scene, I can see a snapshot. So there it is. Now, one of the main reasons you would want to take snapshots, it's really for backup purposes. It's more to see what you changed. So maybe I'm changing this to a falcon instead of a hummingbird. So I change it here, and now I can do a compare. So when I hit compare, it's going to look at the snapshot versus the current document. So I'll click here, and down below, we see it does a Unix style diff, and it'll find any changes and strike through things that were deleted, and in blue, put things that were added. And so you'll see all the changes in that fashion. Now you can also compare snapshots. So let me go here. So I'll go past 3 weeks and I'll take a snapshot of this. So I'll go document, snapshots, and you don't have to take snapshots of everything at once. You can just do a single scene if you want. So I'll do a snapshot with title. Maybe this was in October instead. First draft. So now we can see that there are 2 snapshots of this particular scene. If I go to a different one, we only see the one. Okay, so it does keep track of that stuff separately. And now I mentioned that you could do a diff, a compare on the currently selected snapshot versus current document, but you can also compare 2 snapshots. So let me just take the first draft here and do a compare. And we see that there are no differences found, and that's because the snapshot I took is the same as the current document. But if I selected these 2 and do a compare, we can see 2 different changes. Hummingbird was changed to falcon, and 2 was changed to 3. And that'll just show, again, any change that's made will be either in red striked out or blue for additions. Maybe you do want to revert as well. You can roll back to a certain snapshot if you want as well. Maybe you made some changes and you just don't like them, and so you can roll back to a previous version. So that's it. That's the 10 steps. I know this was a longer video, but I think this one deserved it. Again, Scrivener is pretty powerful. I don't think it's overly complex, but there's a bit to learn. And so I wanted to pass along enough for you to get into Scrivener and use it effectively for your projects. I'd like to pass it to you now. Was there anything I missed that you'd like to see covered? Is there anything you find particularly helpful in Scrivener? If so, please leave a comment below. And if you found this useful, please like and share with those who might benefit from it. As I mentioned, I'll have more Scrivener videos, plus deep dives into the writing process with videos on world building, character creation, plotting, and more. So hit subscribe to be notified when those come out. Until next time, dream big, stay positive, and keep writing. Peace, everyone.